What would you do if you had infinite possibilities? Possibilities right at your fingertip and the ability to travel the multiverse any second you want. Well, that's the situation Nora finds herself in the Midnight Library. I think this book has a lot of issues, but has an incredible premise, and I wanna so much talk about this. And spoiler warning for the book, I'm gonna spoil the entire book. I'm sure you're aware of that because of the fucking runtime of this video. But before I summarize it, I just want to say that this book is definitely worth reading. You should. But it's also not perfect, and I want to talk about that. So The Midnight Library is a very interesting book. It follows Nora Seed. In the beginning of the book, she is experiencing one of the worst days in her life. Her cat dies, she gets fired, she's teaching a guy piano, and he decides to quit piano. And she realizes she's no longer needed. She's an empty vessel. Everything that once depended on her has moved on. I think it's a very interesting and relatable thing that Nora is going through for someone that is struggling with mental health. I think pushing away the responsibility for yourself to others, I think is very common. And I don't mean this in a manipulative way. I'm not talking responsibility over actually having to do things to still being here. Nora is not doing that. I don't think most people that are depressed are doing that. Of course, there are some, but I don't think most are, and I don't think most people that would be in Nora's situation would act like that. Just the responsibility over wanting to be here, pushing that into someone else can be enough for someone to still being here, because it makes it possible for someone to not want to live, yet not want to die, because you are no longer needing to find and do the extra mile to actually get better. You can stay where you are because you don't want to be here. You're just here because of someone else. You're just here because your cat needs you, or your work needs you, or your family would miss you, or whatever. Finding that meaning about living for yourself is extremely important, and something I think a lot of depressed people, and I think this book is trying to get that feeling. And I think that is an incredible theme to have in your book. It's a very strong and emotional theme, but a theme that I don't think this book is handling in the best way. I'll get to that. Because then she can rationalize being here with finding reasons to live that are unrelated to her emotions, which is the thing that she actually needs to work on. But after all of these things disappear, she decides to take an overdose. But instead of death, something else meets her. The multiverse. If you're not sure what the multiverse is, I'll give you a quick summary. The multiverse, or quantum multiverse that this book is based on, is the thought that every decision you make is actually splitting the universe into two different scenarios where you did both of those options. For example, in one universe, you might have subscribed to me, in one universe you didn't. And in one universe, that maybe will lead to some consequences. Maybe in the one that you subscribe to me, maybe you will find cool videos and enjoy my channel. And the one that you didn't subscribe to me, I will be angry at you for the rest of my life. Your actions have consequences, but you're the one who's choosing where in the multiverse you want to live. Because you have the decision right now, and you have a million other decisions. And you deciding not to do anything is still part of the decision of being part of that universe. And that is what this book is really about. And they show that with a library. So instead of death, she sees a big library, and she walks into this room and meets a woman called Mrs. Elms. It's her old librarian from school, standing in a big library, much bigger than the one she had in school. But the one thing that is familiar is both Mrs. Elms and a board of chess. Inside of the library, there is an infinite amount of books, an infinite amount of bookshelves, each book representing one other alternative that she could have gone but decided not to. And there is an infinite amount of books, and I will get back to that. And all of them have a green cover, except for one black one, the Book of Regrets. This book is connected to her root life, and everything she regretted about her life is written down in this book, big or small. And while she is in this library, we get to learn more about Nora and about her backstory, because this story is not very linear. But in this way of the Book of Regrets, they explore her background in a non-linear way. Maybe, it says in the book, if she decided to not break up her band with her brother, maybe they would still have contact with each other. Maybe, if she kept swimming when she was little, her dad would be proud of her. Maybe if she listened to her teachers and Mrs. Elms, maybe she could be a researcher outside of Norway. Maybe if she followed her ex-man's dream of opening a bar. Maybe they would still have a relationship. Maybe they would even have kids together. I'm not gonna get super annoying with this. I think it's clear what I'm trying to say. And the point I'm trying to get across is that she has a lot of wishes for others. Most of her regrets are based on things she wish she did to make someone else happy. And I think that's pretty obvious. And I understand that sometimes you live so much inside of your head, it's hard to actually see the truth, and you have to have something screaming in your face to be able to, whoa, see the connections, see the dots, see the parallels that you've actually been living in. But it's just kind of annoying how much they drag this, that like it takes a very good while for her to figure out that, whoa, actually maybe I should do stuff for myself, you know? As I said, this is something I fucking noticed before she even died. The only reason she's alive is to please others. She's extremely much a people pleaser, and that is not a healthy way to live life. It takes her like years to figure it out, or I don't know how long it takes. It's not really clear. When she tries to kill herself, the time for her stops, and that little second where she's about to die but not really dying is where she's stuck between, in this limbo state. And again, I think she's there for years because she's doing a lot of things in that time, but maybe not, or maybe it just doesn't work with years. I don't know. I think it's very obvious to see where the story is heading. She's going to explore the different possibilities and realize that it wasn't much better than what she thought. And the Book of Regrets are gonna get thinner. But I know that I've read the book now, and it's easier for me to say, but I wrote this script before I finished the book, and I was like, oh, that's exactly where this book is heading. The bigger question is what actually Nora has to Mrs. Elm. She says, where am I? Why am I not dead? Because that's a great question. I understand this whole moral and like that she should appreciate what she has, but like, why is she not dead? Why is she there? What's the point? And the answer, Mrs. Elm says, is that it's not for Nora to decide when to die. Which is a weird answer. That is probably one of the weirdest answers she could have gotten, because that kind of implies that you cannot kill yourself. And everyone that tries to kill themselves is ending up in one of these limbo states. It's weird. And I understand that it's not based in our reality. Like, you know, it has a different premise than our reality. It doesn't have to follow our natural laws, but it just, I cannot really imagine it. But again, you don't have to be able to imagine things for something to be a good story. So this isn't necessarily a jab at the story, but it makes it feel, it just seems like they couldn't really decide if it was supposed to take place in a world that we can relate to, a world that we cannot. Because yes, it is kind of a fantasy book, or like more like maybe a spiritual book, but it's very easy to like imagine yourself in the book because it's not that different. But it's kind of also hard when it's not that different, but it is still different enough to be like, whoa, this wouldn't have worked, or like, you know. And well, Mrs. Elm tells that there's an infinite amount of books with infinite possibilities, and they really make a hard hitting point with that. There's an infinite, and I'll get back to that, because I'm not in love with that idea. And when she opens a book and she starts reading, she gets transformed into that version of her, which is interesting because it's very much a foil. A foil is in piece of media, a foil is something that reflects something else, that either is the opposite or the same, or usually the opposite, to make something stand out more. And this is very clearly a foil to how Nora lives her life. She is usually depending on other people depending on her to stay alive, but now she's not just alive, kind of, but also the people she's meeting in these realities are people she cannot really connect with, because they are real in that universe, and she's not. She's just kind of a floating state of being that can just jump between realities. She's not really connected to any of those except for her original one, and she's already left that one. So Nora becomes, in this hyper sensitive state where she needs to find whatever she wants. But she doesn't still, even though nothing, the people around her really matters anymore for her. She still depends on what they want because she doesn't really know what she wants. I think this is a very smart way to depict a foil. Usually a foil is a character or a thing, but having a foil to someone's personality actually being the state itself, I think it's a very cool and interesting way to depict a story. And it kind of brings this whole narrative about living for yourself in a nice bow, in a nice end. So why do I have a problem with it? I have a problem with it because it feels like they have a lot of ideas, but they don't really know what to do with them. It doesn't really feel like Nora is changing under the story, which makes this incredible story, an incredible premise, kind of fall flat because it doesn't really go anywhere. It's like you have a sword and you have been sharpening this sword and it's super good, but then right when you're about to attack someone, you're like holding it on the wrong edge and you slice your hands open and you're like, fuck, like, yeah, it's cool, you made a good sword, you just didn't use it. One thing when you analyze a story, you have to assume that everything that is inside of story is purposefully, even though it's not, because it doesn't matter what is purposefully or not. The only thing that matters is the story, and the story is the thing I'm gonna analyze. If I was analyzing what I thought the author meant by the story, it wouldn't be the same as this is, because I'm not analyzing that, I'm analyzing the story. And why am I bringing all of this up? Because I want to get into another thing that, again, probably the author didn't think of, but it is part of the story, and it is changing how I see the story. One thing that Nora doesn't think about in the slightest is actually the people she is replacing. Or she does a little bit in the beginning. So she asks Mrs. Elm, so if I go into someone else's life and I live there for a bit, and then I travel back here, what happens to them? Like, what will happen when I'm there? And Mrs. Elm says, oh, no, they like black out. They don't remember anything that's going on. And then their brain kind of like makes up memories just to like fit the situation. Which, makes sense. And she's like, oh, I'm actually so fascinated how much the brain can just make up by itself. Again, I get that. I don't have any problem with that. What I do have a problem with it is after that, Nora just goes, oh, okay, well, that's fine. And then they just continue. And Nora, you are taking people's lives. You are replacing them, even if it's just for a couple of days. You are taking their place in their universe. A place where they earned. They fighted to be there, and you just go in and take it. And worse so, the whole point of the book is for her to find a universe where she feels like she belongs, so she can stay there forever. So the whole book, she's looking for a life that she can replace. That is weird. That is that doesn't feel like a good main character. That feels like a villain. That feels like fucking Wanda from Multiverse of Madness. Literally, that is literally her fucking story arc. And she's the villain of that movie, and here she's supposed to be the main character, the one I'm rooting for. I don't know, it's weird. It's weird. In Doctor Strange and the multiverse shit, she literally had to like kill them, actually physically snap their neck and like kill them, which is making it a lot more grim, but like, it's still an instant death. Like, it doesn't really matter if you do it that way or if you do it in this book way. Either way, you just replace them. They instantly die and you replace them. And not just that she is fine with this, but that she doesn't even consider it. She doesn't even think about it, because we're living the story out of Nora's perspective. So we know that Nora is not even like giving a slightest of a shit about all of these other versions of herself. It's weird. It's fucking weird. And if I'm gonna analyze the story, that makes me not like the main character. And this is something I thought about a lot when I read the book, but it doesn't really lead anywhere, sadly. And just to be clear, I am not mad or angry that Nora should have done something differently or change the situation, because it's very clear that she did not choose to be there. If she could choose, she would die. That is very clear. But she's just the fact that she's not considering even about the other people she's replacing. She's not even thinking about it. Just that makes me feel like she's not really a likable character. And even in the end, she doesn't really consider it. She decides to stay in her life for a very long time, and the only thing that breaks her out of that life is realizing that she actually did good thing in her original life, and she's angry that she got broken out of that good life, but she doesn't give a shit about that Nora that actually did what was needed of her to get to that good life. She realizes that she doesn't want everything just to be handed to her on a silver platter. She wants to actually work for the things and deserve it, which is noble, but it's also very egotistical. You're saying, hey, I don't want to take this life from someone else because I want to earn my life. Not, hey, I shouldn't take this life from someone else because they deserve that life, because they have earned that life. It's still about you. It's still about the main characters. It's very, very, very egocentrical, and that makes me not really like the main character. She only cares if she deserves it, not if the other version of her deserved it or anything else. And I think also this is a good way to talk about the actually first life she gets transformed into. She chooses a life where instead of breaking up with her ex-man, she stays with him and they open a bar together. A little smaller life, a life that she doesn't actually need to perform that much like she does in the future lives. And she realizes that this isn't a great life. The man is pretty manipulative and angry and acting kind of like a psychopath, and apparently it's implied that he cheated on her when he was drunk, so it's not an amazing life. And so she just starts yelling at him and then snaps back into the Midnight Library, which just makes me wonder, poor that other Nora that got stuck with that. Like, imagine being in a toxic relationship and then someone taking control over your body, screaming in your toxic relationship's face, and then just leaves you alone to deal with it for the rest of your life. Doesn't sound like a very good character. Like, it doesn't sound like a hero, but it doesn't even sound like a decent person. And she doesn't even care that she left this poor Nora in this awful situation. I don't know. It just immediately made me feel like Nora was not a great person. And this kind of loop about her going into a universe, realizing, shit, this wasn't that good, and then going back, repeats a couple of times until kind of halfway through the book, where she wishes that she was part of a scientific crew outside of Norway, where they study icebergs. And she meets a man on that ship named Hugo. And Hugo is a very interesting character, and I'm gonna talk about him and about this universe for a bit. So strap in. He says hi. She says hi back. He says that they haven't talked before. She says, oh, okay, what's your name? He says, my name is Hugo. She goes, oh, okay. And they talk and they click and everything goes well until that same evening when he goes, you know, we have talked before. And she looks a bit surprised at him, and then he says, you're not from here, are you? And she freezes. I guess a bit stunned, obviously. And he says, relax, nothing you have to worry about. I'm also what I call a shifter. So he is in the same situation as her. He is also traveling through different multiverses, and for some reason they chose the same one, and that they're living in the same one. He says that this has been longest he's ever been in one, and it's only been a couple of days. And she's just like, whoa. Hugo says that he's actually living in a coma. He asks Nora how she is dying, and she says that she tried to take an overdose. He says that he'd been meeting a lot of people, and he has actually lived hundreds of different lives, and he's just happy to have met someone again. And because he had met so many other shifters, that's why he had an easy time recognizing that Nora was not the same Nora that she had talked to. Apparently there's always a place they go to, and in that place they always have a familiar figure in their life, and Nora has the library and her librarian. I really like this way to fleshing out the universe. It really feels like its own little ecosystem. But here's the thing. Okay, here's the thing that I've been hinting a little about during this video, and I'm gonna finally bring up. Infinite is a weird term. I'm gonna bring this up for two different reasons. So, infinite doesn't mean everything is possible. That's a very thing that is very easily misunderstood in math and in infinite possibilities. That just because something has an infinite possibilities doesn't mean that it has all the possibilities. It just means that every possibility that could happen will happen. For example, there is an infinite amount of numbers between 0 and 1. That means that it's an infinite amount of numbers there. But you can look forever and you will never find a number that is higher than 1 or lower than 0. Because even though it's an infinite, it's still a finite infinite. Which I know kind of goes against each other, but that's how it works. But that means that everything that is possible is not just possible, but is infinitely possible. What I mean by that is, let's say we take 0.3. 0.3 exists in this scale between 0 and 1. But then you think about it and you realize that there's actually an infinite amount of 0.3, because there's 0.3.9 blah 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 blah. There is infinite amounts of numbers that start with 0.3. And there's an infinite amount of numbers that start with 0.4, because that has a lower infinite than the rest of the infinites. But even though there's many infinites in this infinite, doesn't still mean that everything is possible. It's still a limitation to these. I'm bringing this up because both a good thing and not necessarily a bad thing. I'll start with the good thing either way. So even though there is infinite amount of universes, and there is a possibility of someone in a universe becoming a shifter, that means that there's an infinite amount of shifters, and therefore it's not strange that they meet each other. The thing that I have a hard time accepting is that there should be more shifters than universes. Just like my example, there is more numbers that start with 0.3 than there are numbers starting with 0.329. Because both of them are infinite, it's just different scales of infinite. Which means that there should be plenty of shifters in every universe. And maybe there is, but that kind of makes it seem so unrealistic in my opinion. I cannot relate to the story as much to be like, oh no, actually universe hoppers are actually super common and people just don't talk about it. I don't know, it's just it's a bit strange. And why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing this up because this is actually making a huge character analysis possible for me about Mrs. Elms. Because Mrs. Elms is part of Nora, so it's kind of a character analysis on Nora, but I'm gonna talk about it as if it was Mrs. Elms, because she is depicted as a character, even though that character is part of Nora. Doesn't matter, I'm sorry. Because everything that is possible in an infinite amount of room is possible an infinite amount of times, that means that Nora saying, hey, I want to go to outside of Norway and study iceberg, because that possibility is possible, that means that there's an infinite amount of possibilities where she does exactly that. Why does Mr. Elms place her in a universe where Hugo is just 5 meters away from her? This never gets brought up, by the way. Again, just to be clear, Hugo, there's only one of Hugo. Oh, technically there should be infinite. Okay, this Hugo only exists in one out of an infinite amount of universes. I don't believe that Mrs. Elms just accidentally put them in the same universe. And I know Mrs. Elms did it, and not the possibility of Hugo's mind being like, hey, I want to look for another shifter, and then that's why they got in the same universe. Because again, Hugo was already in the universe before Nora got in there, so it must have been Mrs. Elms that chose them to get in the same universe. Then my bigger question is why. I'm gonna analyze the story as a story and not what the author intended, because honestly I don't think the author intended very much by this, but I am analyzing the story, and by analyzing the story it tells me that Mrs. Elms wants Nora to meet this shifter. Why does she want that? And I think that could be of many different reasons. I think one of them could be that she feels like Nora is traveling so much throughout the multiverse and is now starting to lose connections to the people that are close to her. She doesn't really see the people around her as humans anymore, and she needs that human connection to be able to go through with this, to not give up on herself. So Mrs. Elm thinks, hey, I should give her a person she actually can relate to, Hugo. Or maybe another possibility could be that Mrs. Elm thinks that Nora is very unsure what to do with her life, and she wants to prove to Nora that she can end up as Hugo. She can be there for many years and nothing bad will happen. But the problem with that is that they are in vastly different scenarios. Hugo is again in a coma, and Nora is about to take an overdose. A coma is much more stable than an overdose, which means that Nora has a lot less time than Hugo has. And this isn't speculation, this is something that they talk about in the book. Even Mrs. Elms get a bit angry when Nora is just like, well, I can just be here forever, and then she's like, no, you can't. Yes, Hugo can, but Hugo is special. You cannot be like him. So I don't think that's the reason, or if it is, that's a weird way to go against it afterwards. I think the main reason is that she feels like she needs some human connection. But could it be something else? Maybe it's actually the opposite. Maybe she wants to scare Nora, to be like, hey, you shouldn't end up like Hugo. He's stuck here. You've been stuck here for years. You don't want to be like him. You want to actually find a way out of here. Because otherwise you might end up as him, only happy that you get some kind of a connection with anyone. He doesn't seem to live the most happily life. So later that evening, they decide to hook up, and a very interesting thing happened, which I think is pretty hilarious. Nora, thinks that the sex is so bad, so she gets transformed out of the reality to avoid having sex with him. She doesn't do this on purpose, which is why I think it's even crueler. It's not like she's trying to be an asshole, she just is. And I love that. I think that is hilarious. And it also builds so much drama because the thing is, when you snap out of the reality, most people wouldn't notice, but Hugo definitely would. Because during that time, when someone else had your body, you don't remember what happened, you don't remember who he was, you're just trying to figure out. So the real Nora in that universe would have gone back to her body and be like, whoa, I'm having sex with some guy, okay, yeah, this is happening, I'm enjoying this or whatever, and then afterwards be like, what's your name again? Because again, they shouldn't really know each other. Or she should be like, you're Hugo, right? And then he will realize, oh, this is not the same Nora that I was just with. Or he will just talk about realities and she'll be like, what the fuck is this guy talking about? Could be many different ways. Either way, Hugo will figure out that Nora left him during their hookup. I don't know, it's fun drama. I don't know, I really like that part of the book, that they change it up and use this like device that we have been given and that she's been given during the book, and actually use it as a way to show her off her emotions, even unintentionally. So it would suck if they like never brought it up again and then just kind of ignore it. Except they kind of explore this vein again, because she meets Hugo again in a bar, and this time he leaves her, but they never bring up anything about that evening, or they just act like they're friends and that they have always been friends. And I think that is even worse than just not bringing it up, because that kind of like just ruins all the like coolness that came with Nora during that scene. And I think this is a very clear example of the author building something unintentionally, something that I find meaning in, that I think is cool, that I think builds tension, and then he doesn't even realize that it does, and then ruins it without even knowing about it. That's what it feels like. I wish we got some kind of a release from that, some kind of a small story arc climax. I'm sorry. If we're gonna pretend like everything is intentional, then I would think that the reason they don't talk about it is because Hugo is too stressed to talk about it. Maybe he finds it embarrassing that he was been so demasculated by this one person that he confessed his love to, and he's just too too embarrassed to talk about it. Maybe. And that is an interesting character, absolutely. Cannot really say that that is what's going on. That is very not easy to tell. But it could definitely be. It definitely could be. I would need to see more of Hugo to be able to say anything, though. Another thing that makes me a bit irritated about the book is after the iceberg, but before the last adventure, she wishes that she would be staying in the band that she and her brother created. So they created a band and she jumped out of it because she felt like it was too much pressure and she needed to not have that in her life. But after that, her brother was pretty angry at her and she felt like that was one of the reasons he resented her. So she wishes that she never left the band, and she realizes that she is actually one of the most famous singers on earth, and she's so surprised by this. Sometimes it doesn't feel like Nora understands what infinite means, like everyone on earth has the possibility of becoming a super famous singer. You have to give everything to do it, you know? And again, this isn't fucking the story's fault. It's just Nora. She just annoys me that she's just like, what? I could do that? Because that's kind of also the point of the book, that she's supposed to get some self-confidence to be like, whoa, I actually could be a singer, you know? I get that, but I don't know. I think Nora is kind of an annoying character, to be completely honest. But then she realizes that her brother is not part of the band when they're performing, and she gets a bit confused. So she asks his best friend, Ravi. So she asks Ravi, "Where's Joe?" He goes, "Oh, he's probably just like smooshing with the producers or with the paparazzi, smooshing with the paparazzi." And then they play the song and everything goes great. And then they have Nora is supposed to be on a podcast. This interview annoys me a lot. The way that they're treating Nora in the scene is very dehumanizing. So the first question, the one that they start with, is about her restraining order against her ex-husband. What? That is such a weird first question for an interviewer to have. I get that is the point, that you're supposed to sit there and be like, whoa, you know, but like, that wouldn't happen, would it? Would that be the first question someone ask a famous singer after she's just been on a tour? So what about your ex-husband that you had to file an restraining order against? What do you feel about that? And then she responds with, I don't really want to talk about it, you know, I want to talk about my music, that's why I'm here.
Because I'm here to sell my movie. This is a commercial for the movie, make no mistake.
And they go, well, yes, I know, but still, we want to hear about the ex-husband thing, remember? We talked about that. Which is also such an asshole behavior, you know? She's making it clear that she doesn't want to, but... And then they move on to something way less emotional, you know, about her last producer and how they were ripping her off, and that she was filing a lawsuit, I think, against them. I don't really remember. Nora doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about, so she just goes, oh yeah, it was awful, you know. You know, but then they ask something. And she questions them a little bit, and then she gets the answer that she didn't want to hear. She finds out that Joe is dead, and apparently they're asking about some songs that were supposed to be written about him. And she freezes, and she goes, he died how? And they were like, well, he died of an overdose, you know that. No. And she rushes out of there and she goes up to Ravi and she was like, you said that Joe was talking to the paparazzi. That's what you said. And he goes, yes, she was. And then she goes, what do you mean she? Yeah, Joanna, our new producer. I'm bringing this up because of two reasons. Number one is because I think Nora is acting a bit weird that her brother from a different universe is dead. I don't know why she cares that much, because it's not her brother. Again, it's a brother from a different universe. I don't know. Maybe I've watched too much Rick and Morty when I was fucking 13, you know? And I'm just like desensitized to that. But like, why do you give a shit if a fucking different version of your brother is dead? Like, what? I don't really understand that. Even though I don't fully relate to it, I do think it's a good character building, and it makes Nora seem like a genuine and kind person for the people around her. Even though, again, I don't fully relate to it, I see it and I can appreciate it. One thing that I cannot see or appreciate is the fact that Ravi, in her original universe, was angry, so angry at Nora because she ruined her brother's dream, something he brought up to her on the last day when she was alive. And I think that is interesting because in this universe, he doesn't seem to give a single shit about her brother. I mean, he died and he wasn't there, apparently. And yes, of course, Nora should know that her brother is dead. So she's saying, where's Joe? He shouldn't, like, it's weird if he was like immediately like, yo, your brother that is dead. You know, obviously he would be like, well, obviously she's not talking about him because he's dead. I get that, but it's just, I think it's such a clear moment where you can see the difference between Nora's character and Ravi's character, because they're reacting so differently to the same situation. And in reality, Ravi should have a stronger emotional attachment to that version of Joe than what Nora has, because it's not even her Joe. It's not even her universe. So why does it really matter for her? I don't get it. But it's sad that it matters more for her than it does for Ravi, where he is from that universe, you know? I'm sorry, I'm gonna move on from that. It also kind of hints, because in her original, I'm gonna spoil the ending a little bit, but in her original universe, she finds out that the reason Joe wasn't talking to her wasn't actually because of the band, it was because he was struggling with alcoholism. And so most likely Ravi just said that to kind of project his own feelings onto Nora. Either way, I think Ravi is a great written bad character, because he is like, he's not evil, he's not doing some evil scheme, you know, like, I don't think he's very, I don't feel like he's a bad guy, but I also feel like he struggles with a lot and maybe not the best guy. And I think this like goes a little bit against Nora, because I don't care about Joe from another universe, but I do care about partly, like, how do I say, okay, she cares so much about Joe from a different universe, but she doesn't care the slightest about Nora from a different universe, which I think is strange. I don't know. I don't get only caring about one of them and caring so much about one of them. She reacts like this when she finds out her mom is dead, or when her dad is dead, or whatever, you know, or her friend is dead. And I just don't get it, how you can care so much about, like, no, Joe from this universe is dead. How can I? No, I cannot do this. No, you know. But then also be like, oh, well, if I stayed here, I would kill the version of me, you know. So it doesn't, you know, she doesn't give a shit about that, which is strange. It's strange. I don't know. It doesn't really feel like the same character. But maybe she just values herself very differently than everyone else, even though I know that is a theme. It's not really herself, she's just different versions of her, so it's not really her, so she should still value them as if they were other people. At least that's what I think, but you know, I guess not. And now we kind of loop back into the infinite universes, you know, because you can use the same logic as I used before, that there's an infinite amount of universes about any situation. That means that there's an infinite amount of universes about this situation. That means that Mrs. Elms must have purposefully put Nora in a universe where Joe died just to make her sad. That is strange. That is weird. Why would she do that? That doesn't make me like Mrs. Elms, and I didn't even like her in the first place. I don't like Nora. I think that's the biggest problem. I don't like any of these characters. I don't know if I was about to say that I like Joe, but I don't know, like is maybe a strong word. Yeah, I think most of the characters are fucking weird, and I just cannot relate to them. I think that is the biggest character problem that they have. But I also cannot really, if I don't like Nora, I also don't like Mrs. Elms, because they are kind of one and the same, you know. I think the only reason she put her in a universe where Joe died was to make the Book of Regrets thinner. But I think that is very manipulative. That's so sad. When I said about that I'm not the biggest fan of Mrs. Elms, I thought I went off script because I just said it because it popped into my head. But I did write it in the script. I just read the script without knowing that I read the script. That is so sad. What the fuck? The biggest problem I have with the book is that it's so repetitive. The same arc is being replayed multiple times. I would be fine if it was like, if it repeated like 1 or 2 times. Maybe 2 times is also a bit of a stretch, you know. A repeating arc is not very satisfying. But depending on how you count, it's closer to 5-6 times it gets repeated. I wouldn't count the last one though. I would count it as 5, but I also wouldn't blame someone for counting it as 6. I think the last one is a bit of a different. It's important for the story as a whole, and so I wouldn't count it as like one of those meaningless small ones, but definitely at least 5. In the end, she regrets that she declined a guy of a date, and she decides to go with him, and that leads to a life like near perfect. She has a child, she has a home, she has a nice job, he has a nice job, he has a lot of money. She couldn't really wish for anything better, and she enjoys that life. It's a bit unclear how long she lives there, but it is significantly longer than she lives in any other universe. I know in the beginning of this video I gave a spoiler warning, but I don't even know if that is necessary for this video, because the ending is the most predictable ending I've ever seen in a book. They even mention it in the book how predictable this ending is, but they don't, like, just pointing out a flaw doesn't remove the flaw. It just shows that you were knowledgeable of the flaw and chose to keep it in. I think it's so boring how predictable the ending was, and I think I don't even have to explain the ending. I think you can figure it out, but I will, just in case, just to make this video like come together in a satisfying way. So after she lives in these hundreds of different lives, 6 important ones, the 6 that they actually focus on, but it's hundreds of other lives that they just fly past, she realizes that she actually had it good all along, that the universe where she belongs is the universe that she left behind, and she decides to go back to the real one, the one that is not written yet. That is such a predictable ending that I hope they would like switch it up a little bit, but they didn't. It was just that, and a part of me is like annoyed that it's such a predictable ending, but another part of me is just like, well, they shouldn't just have done something unpredictable just to be unpredictable, you know? This is a satisfying end to the story arc, so I wouldn't want them to just do something unsatisfying just to be different, I think. But they could have given a bit of a twist to it. I don't know. The second she tried to kill herself and she started reliving different life, I thought it was so clear that the point of the book was that she was like, oh, well, I had it good from the beginning. I shouldn't have wished for better things and blah, blah, blah. You know, we have seen that story so many times. And another problem with the ending is that when she decides to go back to her root life, they hype it up a lot with given that her root life is so difficult and so much more problems than the other lives, but sometimes you have to live with the problems because the decisions you've made are actually worth it in the end. But then she goes back and the problems kind of disappear by themselves. It's a very anticlimactic ending, because it's like, oh, I guess she didn't have any problems, and I'll talk about it, because remember in the beginning of this video I talked about some of the problems she had. Nora Seed. In the beginning of the book, she's experiencing one of the worst days in her life. Her cat dies, she gets fired, she's teaching a guy piano, and he decides to quit piano, and she realizes she's no longer needed. Well, again, they hype these problems up during the whole book, and then in the end, they just kind of like, oh, well, I guess it wasn't that big of a deal after all. Okay, so let's take it step by step. The kid that quitted her piano, she realizes that that kid actually wanted to keep going. He just wanted to hear an apology, I guess, or something. And then after that, he actually told all of his friends that they also should do it. So she got a lot more jobs. So that solved itself, that she didn't even need a second job. She could just do teaching full time. And what did she do to deserve that? I guess she was a good teacher, but she didn't, like, the whole point of a story arc and a story like this, or like a story in general, like the things that are happening in the story is not the important thing. People don't really give a shit about things that are happening in a book or in a story. The things people are caring about is the character development in the story. And showing that a character is different is such an important part of making a satisfying ending. And Nora, yes, the only thing she's changed is that she no longer wants to kill herself. But she hasn't, since the beginning of the book till the end of the book, she hasn't done anything to prove that she has become a better person or deserves better things. Another example of this is her brother. In the beginning of the book, she was so sure her brother hated her because Ravi went up to her and was like, hey, your brother hates you. And she was like, oh no, I guess I'm gonna kill myself. And then in the end of the book, it turns out, oh, her brother actually didn't hate her. He was just angry because of a messy breakup that he was going through. And like, yeah, I understand that like misunderstandings do happen in real life. It's not unrealistic. And it is, it's even common for some, like for people that are not good at communicating. But it is also a very unsatisfying ending to be like, oh, well, she didn't have to change. She just had to like wait for him to reach out. I don't know. A lot of this book and a lot of satisfy in this book is based on her root life. The middle part is as much they are in different lives or in the Midnight Library, and this is her root life. Especially this tiny sliver is the ending that's supposed to be proving that she has changed in her root life. It's just considered in these pages. Like, it's not even 20 pages. And that is obviously not enough time to show that a character has changed, which is why it feels like it's very rushed. It feels like the author like had to like be like, oh, well, now she's back to normal and everything is great. And it's just unsatisfying. Because it kind of undercuts the importance of wanting to live. Because then it was like, oh, well, she didn't actually have to change. She just needed to wait 24 hours and then everything would solve by itself. Which is not a satisfying ending. That's annoying. And it undercuts all this trouble about being alive because there wasn't any trouble of being alive. Apparently. All that she had to change is just her mindset. And she didn't even have to change, like... The only thing she had to change was like, oh, I don't want to die. I want to live. That's the only thing. And like, also, so much of this book is about how much she needs to live for herself and how she needs to take responsibility over her own happiness and how she cannot just be alive to please others and regret life because she didn't please others, because she's a people pleaser. Then you would expect the ending to kind of reflect that, to be like, oh, she learns to live for herself. But no, everything that changes in those 20 pages, not even 20, like, I don't know, closer to 15, everything that changes is that people appreciate her again. Her friend from Australia says, oh, I'm gonna fly back and live in the same city as you so we can be closer friends. And her brother says, oh, I'm gonna meet you more. And the kid again tells all of his friends so she can teaching more people, which is great. But it like, was that the point of the book? That she just needed more people to depend on? Or more people to depend on her? I don't know. It didn't seem like that for most of the book. And that is a weird stance to take. And also, all of these good things happen because she tries to kill herself. Which is also a weird sign to kind of give off. Because this is obviously a book that is supposed to be for people with mental health issues, for people to relate. And it's wild to have an implication in the end of the book that all she needed to get a better life is to try to kill herself, but because then people will care about her more. That is insane. That is a weird fucking ending to leave a book with. And again, it doesn't seem like the ending was very planned out. I feel it was planned out that she was gonna go back to her root life, but after that, he just tried to end it. And that is mostly why I'm making this video. I think the ending is extremely poorly executed. And I'm not just gonna say what is bad. I'm also gonna say what I think would be better. This is how I would change it. I think books are being compared a lot to movies, but I think they should be compared more to series. because they don't have the same story arc that they have to follow for a limited time, because the author can choose how many story arcs they want to have in this book. And the overall story arc in this book is that she needs to learn to live for herself, and she needs to understand that the life she was meant to live was the one that she already lived, which is a fine story arc. I don't have a problem with that. My problem is where it's placed. I don't think it should be placed 3 seconds before the ending of the book. I think it should be placed like maybe halfway through, maybe even like in the 3rd act, because that gives the author time to actually prove that she is trying to live a better life, and you can see how that shows. And then you get a comfortable story arc, and you also don't have to fucking sit there and wait for it, because it's so obvious that that story arc is where it's heading. So it's just like, you just sit there and wait for, oh, she's gonna go back to her reality, she's gonna go back, yeah, when is she gonna do it? Soon, when is she gonna do it? So I think it's just so much more impactful if it doesn't come right in the end, so you actually be like, oh, what happens now? Because then you're kind of with Nora again, without fucking... But I'm not necessarily saying that this book needs to be longer, because I think a huge part of this middle section can be fucking cut out of the book, honestly. Because repeating the same fucking story arc like 5 times is ridiculous. It's weird. It's tiresome. Repeat it a couple of times, maybe. Maybe scratch the fucking Dan, the ex-husband, because that was completely useless. Oh, what? He was a bad boyfriend. She already knew that. She just kind of forgot about it, I guess. Dumb. It's dumb. It's a waste of fucking pages. So I would have probably made her go to the library, then travel to the life where she was a rock star, and then travel to the life where she was an Olympic swimmer. And in that same life, she meets Hugo, so we can scratch the Icelandic one. And then she travels to the last, maybe they can have like a quick montage of her trying, like they do in the book, but not focusing too much on it. And then after that, she travels to the one where she's married, and she has a kid. And then she realizes that she needs to go back to her original life, because she wants to have a life she deserves. And so she travels to her original life, and then they can actually flesh out the story from there and make it seem like she learned something from it. I don't know, it just feels like he had a great premise of a story, which I do agree. I do genuinely think that. I think the idea of the story, like I said, having a character that is so much of a people pleaser, being put in a situation where they cannot please anyone except themselves, and they have to actually struggle with coming to terms of how to make yourself happy. It's a super interesting premise, and I think it's executed in a good way, but just the pacing is awful in the book. He should have not focused that much on certain parts and focused a lot more on other parts. And I think that is the biggest issue this book has. That's it. This video has been a fucking nightmare to make. As you can tell, the script is fucking 18 pages long, and this is finally the ending. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe if you like this certain type of video where I'm doing kind of reviews and I'm telling the story. Please press the like button. I would appreciate that very much. Please comment if you enjoyed this certain type of video, and also I just want to say, every music that is in this video is made by me, and every visual effects, both 2D and 3D, are also made by me, unless it's strictly said that it's not. Then maybe not, but otherwise it's made by me. And if you want to see a video that is maybe similar to this, press the video that is on screen. Or if this is the most recent video, then probably it's gonna be a FNAF video here, but you know, if not,